Dr. Aarav Malhotra, his wife Priya Malhotra, and nurse Eliza Romero, 3 lives bound together by love, betrayal, and obsession. What began as a respected doctor's secret affair in Los Angeles soon spiraled into a deadly confrontation in a dark parking garage. This is the shocking story of how a marriage built on sacrifice, a nurse fueled by desire, and a secret hidden in plain sight ended in blood and tragedy. Dr. Aarav Malhotra was the kind of man people noticed, not because he sought attention, but because he carried himself with quiet authority. In Los Angeles, his name was spoken with respect, both inside the walls of West Valley Medical Center and within the wider medical community. Colleagues admired his calm approach during emergencies, patients trusted his reassuring presence, and administrators saw him as the model of professionalism. At 41, he had already climbed to the top of his field as a cardiologist, with awards, research papers, and countless lives saved to his name. To those around him, he seemed to have it all. At home, the picture was equally enviable. Aarav lived with his wife, Priya Malhotra, in an elegant 2-story house in Glendale, a suburban neighborhood known for its quiet streets lined with jacaranda trees and neatly kept gardens. The couple appeared to embody stability and success. Priya was admired for her grace and warmth. She had given up a promising career in finance back in India to support Aarav when he was still pursuing his residency in the United States. Together, they had built a life that looked flawless from the outside. Their neighbors saw them as the kind of couple who hosted polite dinner parties, waved cheerfully when walking their dog, and always seemed to be in harmony. But appearances can be deceiving, and beneath the surface, subtle cracks had already begun to form. Aarav's career demanded long hours, endless night shifts, and constant mental strain. Priya often felt as if she was living in the shadow of his ambition. Though she never said it aloud, she sometimes wondered if her sacrifices were truly appreciated. She missed her own independence, her own identity, but remained devoted to her husband's dream, believing that all the compromises were worth the life they had achieved together. Aarav, however, carried his own quiet discontent. The role of the flawless doctor and faithful husband became a burden. He was respected, yes, but also confined by the expectations placed upon him. His marriage was steady but predictable, lacking the excitement and thrill that had once defined his younger years. He would never admit it openly, but the routine of his personal life left him restless. In his heart, he longed for something that would make him feel alive again, something beyond the monotony of late-night charting and predictable weekend dinners. The Malhotras rarely argued. Instead, their home was filled with polite exchanges and practiced routines. They dined together when schedules allowed, watched movies on quiet Sundays, and attended occasional social gatherings. To outsiders, these were signs of a strong partnership. To Priya, they were the marks of loyalty and stability. To Aarav, they increasingly felt like rehearsed performances in a play he no longer enjoyed. Still, nothing in his life suggested scandal. Aarav was not the kind of man anyone would suspect of straying. He was disciplined, soft-spoken, and carried an air of moral responsibility. Patients entrusted him with their lives, and his wife entrusted him with her heart. That trust would soon be shattered, though at this early stage, no one could have predicted the storm approaching. The seeds of tragedy are often planted in moments that seem ordinary, and Aarav's story was no different. He spent long hours in the hospital, often skipping meals and staying late to handle emergencies. Priya encouraged him, never complaining, believing that his work was saving lives and bringing honor to their family. Yet, it was within those very hospital walls that the chain of events began to unfold. Surrounded by sterile corridors, beeping machines, and exhausted staff, Aarav found something he had not expected. An escape from his carefully crafted image. An outlet for the hunger he never admitted even to himself. Every story of downfall begins with a choice. And Aarav's choices were still ahead of him. For now, he remained the admired doctor and the loyal husband, a man whose life looked like perfection carved in glass. But glass, no matter how beautiful, can break with the slightest pressure. What neither Aarav nor Priya realized was how close they were to the edge, how one secret would soon unravel everything they had built, and how the life they worked so hard to preserve was about to collapse into chaos. At West Valley Medical Center, the rhythm of life was demanding and relentless. Doctors rushed between patient rooms, alarms beeped in intensive care, and the corridors echoed with hurried footsteps. In this environment, where exhaustion and pressure were constants, relationships often formed between colleagues who spent more time together at the hospital than with their families. For Dr. Aarav Malhotra, this was where he first noticed Nurse Eliza Romero, and that single connection would begin a chain of events that spiraled far beyond his control. Eliza was 32, sharp-witted and confident. She had joined the hospital staff just a year earlier, but she quickly built a reputation as a nurse who could handle crises with efficiency and composure. Patients adored her for her warmth, while her co-workers respected her ambition and decisiveness. Unlike many who wore down under the long shifts, Eliza seemed to thrive on the chaos of the emergency ward. She stood out not just for her skill, but for her bold personality, her refusal to simply blend into the background. Where others were content with routine, she sought something larger, something exciting. Aarav first noticed her during a particularly intense night when a patient came in with a severe heart attack. While others hesitated, Eliza was quick, precise, and fearless, following every order and anticipating every need. That night, their professional synergy was undeniable. In the adrenaline-charged atmosphere, Aarav felt an energy he hadn't experienced in years. It was the kind of connection that went beyond work. It was instant, magnetic. What started as professional admiration soon shifted into something more personal. During night shifts, when the rest of the hospital quieted down, Aarav and Eliza would often find themselves talking in the break room, sharing stories about their lives beyond the hospital walls. Aarav spoke of his years in India, his struggles through medical school, and his responsibilities at home. Eliza, in contrast, shared her frustrations about her stalled nursing career, her longing for recognition, and her distrust of long-term relationships after a failed engagement. Their conversations, at first harmless, created a bond. Aarav, who had grown used to Priya's cautious and measured demeanor, found Eliza's directness refreshing. She made him laugh, challenged his views, and made the hospital nights feel less suffocating. Over time, these moments blurred into something neither of them could resist. Coffee breaks stretched into long silences filled with unspoken tension. Small touches, accidental or otherwise, lingered longer than they should. Eventually, what began as a spark ignited into a full affair. They started meeting outside the hospital at hidden cafes or in discreet hotels, always careful not to draw suspicion. To Aarav, these encounters felt like a release from the heaviness of his life, a return to a sense of passion he thought he had buried years ago. For Eliza, however, it was more than just escape. She began to envision a life where Aarav belonged only to her. She saw in him not just a lover, but a partner who matched her intensity and ambition. The thrill of secrecy only added fuel to her desire. While Aarav assured himself he could keep the two parts of his life separate, his marriage with Priya and his hidden relationship with Eliza, Eliza grew restless with being second. She wanted permanence, not fragments stolen in the shadows. The affair carried its own risks, and the weight of secrecy grew heavier with every passing week. Aarav often returned home to Priya with the faint scent of Eliza's perfume lingering on his clothes, or a distracted look in his eyes that betrayed his guilt. Priya, intuitive and observant, noticed the changes even if she chose not to voice them yet. Aarav convinced himself he was still in control, that his carefully constructed life could withstand the double existence he had created. But control was slipping, and the balance between passion and disaster was fragile. Within the sterile walls of the hospital, their secret flourished under the cover of professionalism. No one suspected that behind closed doors, the respected doctor and the ambitious nurse were risking everything. What Aarav failed to see was that Eliza's emotions were no longer just desire. They were edging into obsession. And obsession, when ignored, can turn into something far more dangerous. The connection that had begun as thrilling and intoxicating was slowly becoming a dangerous addiction. For Aarav, it was the escape he craved. For Eliza, it was the future she demanded. And in the quiet corners of West Valley Medical Center, the seeds of inevitable conflict were already taking root. Priya Malhotra had always trusted her instincts. She was not the type to make accusations without reason, and she had spent years understanding the rhythms of her husband's behavior. Aarav's habits were familiar to her, his early mornings, his late-night hospital calls, even the way he preferred his tea when he returned home exhausted. So when subtle changes crept into his routine, Priya noticed immediately. At first, she dismissed them, telling herself that stress could explain the differences. But over time, the pieces began to align into a pattern she could no longer ignore. Aarav began working more emergency shifts than usual, often returning home well past midnight. He became unusually protective of his phone, keeping it face down on the dining table and rushing to pick it up the moment it buzzed. Priya watched these shifts in silence, her suspicions growing heavier each day. What once felt like an open marriage built on trust now seemed filled with hidden doors she was not allowed to open. One evening, while Aarav was in the shower, Priya found herself staring at his phone left unattended on the bedside table. For years, she had respected his privacy, but something stronger than hesitation guided her hand. With a trembling heart, she unlocked the device. The messages she found between Aarav and Eliza Romero were not vague or ambiguous. They were detailed, filled with longing and urgency. Words of passion leapt from the screen, making her feel as if the ground beneath her had crumbled. Aarav had not just drifted into distraction, he had built an entirely separate world with another woman. Priya's first instinct was not rage, but silence. She closed the phone and placed it back exactly where she had found it. Confrontation seemed too sudden, too messy. She was not ready to hear his justifications or excuses. Instead, she carried the truth like a stone in her chest, heavy and unrelenting. Outwardly, she continued her role as the supportive wife, preparing meals, smiling politely at neighbors, and asking Aarav about his day as though nothing had changed. Inwardly, she analyzed every word, every movement, every new excuse he offered. She began keeping quiet records of his late returns, the clothes that smelled faintly of perfume, the moments when his thoughts seemed far away even as he sat beside her. Priya's silence was not weakness. It was strategy. She was building her certainty piece by piece, ensuring that when the time came, her knowledge could not be dismissed as paranoia. But as days turned into weeks, the silence became unbearable. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was a constant presence haunting her every step. Priya's thoughts spiraled into dark places during lonely nights. She wondered about Eliza, this woman who had managed to pull her husband away. Was she younger, more beautiful, more ambitious? Was she offering him the thrill that Priya's steady devotion no longer provided? These questions burned in her mind, but they never found their way to Aarav. Instead, she smiled through dinners and gatherings, hiding the storm that raged inside her. The tension within the Malhotra household grew sharper. Aarav believed his secret was safe, his careful balancing act holding steady. Priya's silence convinced him that his wife suspected nothing. But in reality, every day she grew more aware of the widening distance between them. She noticed how his eyes lit up when his phone buzzed, how his expression softened as he read unseen words, how guilt flickered briefly across his face before he masked it. Still, Priya said nothing. It was not fear that kept her quiet, but the need to choose the right moment. She understood that exposing the affair too soon would only give Aarav the chance to deny and cover his tracks. She wanted certainty, not half-truths. And so, she waited, each passing day tightening the coil of anger and pain within her heart. The silence became her weapon, but it also became her prison. Friends and family saw no change, unaware that behind her composed face, she was unraveling. Priya's quiet suffering turned into sleepless nights and long hours spent imagining how deeply Aarav had betrayed her trust. What she did not realize, however, was how far her silence would eventually drive her. For in holding her pain so tightly, she was feeding a darkness that would one day demand release. What had begun as suspicion was now a certainty too painful to carry. Priya's discovery marked the turning point, the moment where love transformed into something volatile. The careful, devoted wife who once built her life around her husband's dreams was beginning to imagine a different future, one where betrayal would not go unpunished. and where the shadow of Eliza Romero would no longer linger over her marriage. The night was damp and restless, the kind that left the city coated in a thin layer of unease. Rain had swept through Los Angeles earlier in the evening, leaving the streets slick and the air heavy with the scent of asphalt. At West Valley Medical Center, the fluorescent lights burned late into the night, illuminating the hospital's weary rhythm. Nurses hurried from one wing to another, doctors dictated notes into recorders, and the hum of machinery echoed through sterile corridors. It was close to midnight when Eliza Romero finally ended her shift. Her body ached from hours of tending to patients, but her spirit carried an unusual energy. She believed her secret affair with Aarav was heading toward something permanent. He had whispered promises, subtle hints that his life with Priya was crumbling. For Eliza, the future was just within reach. She walked through the hospital doors that night, imagining possibilities, not dangers. The parking garage was nearly empty, its echoing silence broken only by the sound of her heels clicking against the concrete. She clutched her purse, distracted by thoughts of messages she would send to Aarav before bed, and did not notice the figure lingering in the shadows. Priya Malhotra had been waiting for hours, her heart pounding with a mix of fear, rage, and grim determination. She had rehearsed this moment over and over in her mind, torn between walking away or demanding the confrontation she knew was inevitable. Tonight, the silence she had carried for weeks finally shattered. Priya stepped forward from the shadows, her face pale, but her eyes burning with fury. Eliza stopped in her tracks, startled, though recognition quickly followed. The tension between them had been invisible until now, but both women had always sensed it in the unspoken edges of Aarav's lies. In that cold, dim garage, the facade dissolved. Priya accused with her stare alone, while Eliza straightened her shoulders, unafraid. For Eliza, this was confirmation of what she had always wanted, proof that Priya knew she had lost control of her marriage. For Priya, this was the moment she had dreaded and desired in equal measure, the chance to look into the eyes of the woman who had stolen her world. The words exchanged were sharp, though they were few. Eliza carried herself with defiance, unwilling to apologize for her role. She had convinced herself that Aarav belonged to her now, that Priya was an obstacle already fading from his life. Priya, consumed by betrayal, could no longer contain her years of sacrifice, her devotion wasted on a man who had chosen someone else. Anger boiled over, her voice breaking under the weight of hurt and humiliation. As the confrontation escalated, Priya's hand tightened around the object hidden in her purse. She had brought it not out of planning, but desperation. A kitchen knife, small but deadly. She had told herself it was for protection, a shield in case the encounter spiraled beyond her control. Yet now, in the charged silence of the garage, it transformed into something more. In her mind, it became the only way to reclaim her dignity, the only way to end the torment that had consumed her every waking moment. The struggle erupted quickly, a blur of movement and chaos. Eliza tried to defend herself, her cries echoing off the walls of the garage, but Priya's rage was overwhelming. Months of silence, of sleepless nights, and gnawing suspicion poured out in one violent act. The blade found its mark, again and again, until Eliza collapsed against the cold concrete floor. Her eyes, once fierce and burning with ambition, faded into stillness. Priya staggered back, her breath ragged, her hands trembling as she stared at what she had done. The reality of her actions began to sink in with terrifying clarity. The body at her feet was not just her rival, but a woman who had once been full of life, dreams, and future plans. The garage, now silent except for the distant hum of a fluorescent bulb, became a graveyard for secrets and choices that could never be undone. She dropped the knife, her chest heaving, and hurried toward the exit, disappearing into the shadows of the night. Behind her, Eliza's body remained hidden between parked cars, lifeless yet speaking volumes of the dangerous path love, betrayal, and obsession can carve. Priya's footsteps carried her home, but her soul was already haunted. Nothing would ever return to normal. What began as suspicion and silence had ended in blood, and the consequences of this moment were only just beginning to unfold. Morning came quietly, but the silence did not last. A security guard making his routine rounds in the hospital's parking garage stumbled upon a sight so shocking that it froze him in place. Between two parked cars lay the body of Nurse Eliza Romero, her uniform stained with blood, her lifeless eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The scene was gruesome, and the guard's frantic call to authorities set off a chain of events that would unravel everything Aarav Malhotra had worked for. Within minutes, the garage was flooded with flashing lights, officers cordoning off the area, and crime scene investigators meticulously collecting evidence. Detectives quickly began piecing together the events of the night. Surveillance cameras, though limited in angle, revealed a figure entering the garage before Eliza's arrival. Grainy but telling, the footage showed a woman whose features, though partially obscured, resembled Priya Malhotra. The investigators noted her clothing, her movements, and the way she lingered near the area where Eliza would later fall. To them, it was not a coincidence. A motive began to take shape: jealousy, betrayal, rage. When officers arrived at the Malhotra home later that morning, Aarav was still asleep, unaware of the chaos unfolding just miles away. He answered the door groggy, confused by the stern faces demanding to speak with his wife. Priya, calm on the surface but trembling inside, did not resist when questioned. Her silence, the very weapon she had once used to shield herself, now betrayed her. She was taken into custody, her hands bound, her future sealed by the choices of a single night. The interrogation room became the stage for her unraveling. Detectives laid out the evidence: surveillance footage, the knife matching her kitchen set, and the history of Aarav's affair with Eliza. Each detail was another nail in the coffin of denial. Priya listened without protest, her expression distant, as though she had already accepted the fate waiting for her. She confessed in fragments, not with fiery words, but with the weariness of someone crushed by months of silent suffering. For the investigators, it was clear this was a crime of passion, the outcome of betrayal that had finally exploded. For Aarav, the downfall was swift and merciless. In the span of hours, he went from respected cardiologist to disgraced husband at the center of a scandal. The affair, once carefully hidden, was dragged into the open for the world to see. Colleagues who had admired him turned cold. Patients who had trusted him now questioned his integrity, and the community that once praised his accomplishments whispered in disgust. The perfect life he had built collapsed like a house of cards, each piece tumbling under the weight of truth. The media seized on the story, branding it a tragic triangle of love and betrayal. Headlines splashed across newspapers and television screens. Renowned doctor's affair ends in murder. Wife accused in deadly confrontation. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, dissecting every detail of Aarav's double life and Priya's shocking act. The Malhotra, once admired for their success and stability, became a cautionary tale of hidden desires and their deadly consequences. The trial was somber and unrelenting. Prosecutors painted Priya as a woman consumed by jealousy, who planned her confrontation and carried out a calculated attack. The defense countered by describing her as a devoted wife pushed to the breaking point by her husband's betrayal. Both sides agreed on one thing: the affair had set the stage for tragedy. Aarav, called to testify, could barely lift his eyes. His words revealed his guilt, not as a murderer, but as the man who had set the chain of events in motion. He admitted to the affair, his voice cracking, aware that every word was stripping away the last remnants of his reputation. Priya was convicted, her future now tied to a prison cell instead of the life she once envisioned. Aarav, though not legally responsible for Eliza's death, was left to bear the weight of responsibility in another way. His career disintegrated, his marriage destroyed, his name forever stained. Eliza was gone, Priya was imprisoned, and he was left alone in the ruins of the empire he had built on lies. The story of Dr. Aarav Malhotra, Nurse Eliza Romero, and Priya Malhotra echoed through Los Angeles long after the trial ended. It became a reminder that secrets, no matter how carefully hidden, always carry a cost. In this case, the cost was a life lost, a marriage shattered, and a reputation obliterated. What began as passion ended in blood, and what once appeared to be a perfect life revealed itself as a tragedy waiting to happen.